Greetings, children, and welcome to the new series, Tier Ranking Warriors. That's not a very epic title, kinda anticlimactic, really. Anyways, last video I did in the series was on Wings of Fire. I'm going to switch between the two book series, analyzing them and ranking them on a tier list. You may be thinking, Sky, a good Warriors book is drastically different from a good Wings of Fire book. And you're right, it definitely is. They'll be on two separate lists, don't worry. And since the Warriors series is just so absolutely massive, I'll use different lists for each arc. There's just too many to fit them all in a single list. Of course, we start with The Prophecies Begin, the book that started it all. Let's dive into the pros and cons of Into the Wild. Oh, you noticed? I'm trying out a bit of a different format. Tell me if you like it, I'm just experimenting right now. Anyways, let's get into this. I stand by the idea that most things that are first in a series are going to be the best. And so far, with Book 1, I do think this is the case. My first point is the characters. The characters seem to actually be written well, for Warrior standards at least. The side characters have their own personalities, which is pretty rare for the series nowadays. Well, most of them do. Into the Wild also seems to put a much larger focus on the characters and their relationships than the current day books. I love this so much, but it's also really sad to see that this has disappeared. As a prime example, Firepaw, Greypaw, and Ravenpaw are clearly portrayed as friends, and they play, wrestle, and joke around together on multiple occasions. One such occasion that I really like is on pages 136 to 137. I quote, Greypaw let out a yowl of delight and bounded up onto the tree stump. One of his back paws knocked the adder flying. It hit Ravenpaw on the head and wrapped itself around his neck. He, Ravenpaw, leaped onto Firepaw and rolled him easily onto his back. Greypaw reached down from the tree stump and gave Ravenpaw's tail a tug. As Ravenpaw turned to thump Greypaw with a soft forepaw, Firepaw jumped to his feet and leaped into them both, sending Greypaw flying from the stump. All three tumbled into the dirt and tussled on the ground. Finally, they fell apart and settled themselves, panting, beside the tree stump. It's so amazing to see three friends just playing together unapologetically, and this was not only the only time, far from it, but it was my favorite time. I might even go as far as to say that is my favorite scene in the whole book. I actually found myself expecting some grumpy warrior to waltz in and ruin the fun, saying something like, "Warriors do not play fight. Break up and be mature little apprentices." I was waiting for it each time they stopped to mess around and just be kids, but it never happened. It surprised me, because nowadays that happens all the time. I don't blame Greystripe for missing the old days. There's also a lot more friendship than there is in current books. Now, if two cats are being friendly, it means they're in love. They can't just be friends, that's ridiculous. With Into the Wild, we actually get plenty of friendship, not just Ravenpaw, Firepaw, and Greypaw. There's Sandpaw and Dustpaw, who have a clear friendly relationship, and then Longtail, Darkstripe, and Tigerclaw, and even Firepaw and Yellowfang. What I think is a reason for this disappearance of friendships is that the authors try to focus on the plot as the most important thing, which kind of leaves the characters in a hollow place where they can be fixed around whatever the errands need them to be at that moment. They've crowded their writing with their goals to reach the end of the plot, forgetting about how important the characters also are as well as the story. In this book, there's a lot of time used up spending time with the characters and their bonds with one another, and it shows that it is okay to do that. In fact, it's much better. I praised this book the most for this particular point. We, the Warriors fanbase, are deprived of friendship development, and Into the Wild gives it in full. It has a great balance between the characters and the plot, which is what is needed for a pleasing read. I also want to touch on Firepaw as the main character. Many people dislike Firestar, and I can understand why. He seems pretty vanilla and is always the center of attention, always butting into prophecies. Everyone loves him because he's so brave and smart and handsome. Yes, the authors actually describe Firepaw as a handsome Ginger Tom in the allegiances. But honestly, he isn't that bad. Well, later in the books, when we don't have his perspective anymore, then yeah, I can't agree with you on some points. But in this first arc, The Prophecies Begin, and in Into the Wild, he's a very good main character. He has to deal with the pressure of the clan and previously being a kitty pet, having to prove himself and go one step higher every single time, just to prove he's even slightly as good as the Wildborn warriors. This side plot is executed very well, I think, for warrior standards, although there are still cons. One of them being Firepaw has hardly any negative traits. Where are his flaws? I'm trying to think hard for some, but I genuinely can't come up with any. I want to, but I can't find any. It might just be my flighty memory, but yes, he has portrayed very, very little, if any at all, flaws. If you know some, tell me in the comments, I'd really like to know. Oh, can't forget the odd relationship that Firepaw and Spotted Leaf have. The reactions in this book made me feel very weird. First of all, Spotted Leaf is described as having the sweetest smell. She's so beautiful, she smells so good, oh my god, look how stunning her fur is, holy crap, she smells amazing. Firepaw clearly has a crush on her. I didn't catch any hint of Spotted Leaf returning this, and thank Rassilon, honestly. That would have been some very bright red alarms. Just saying. It's like the Errands are trying really hard to make this a thing. They're waving their arms at the sky, screaming with a giant sign on the ground saying, "Look at this! Firepaw likes her! She has a naturally amazing aroma at all times!" It's pretty overdone, and I think I could do without it. It low-key weirds me out. I also want to say how much I like Greypaw's personality. He doesn't take anything seriously, not even trying to be mature, and I love that so much about him. He makes everything into a joke and just wants to have a good time. If we had more of this, I think I'd find the series much more enjoyable. With that said, that's the characters section done. I have a lot less praise to give on this section, unfortunately. While the writing is definitely not as bad as it is in the present day, it still shows that they weren't the best. I think there are multiple reasons for why this is, but I'm not going to get into that. It is what it is. Anyways, I'm sure you all know, if you read the Warriors books, that the authors have a tendency to leave in typos. A lot. Into the Wild is not free from the typos. I didn't read closely enough to actively search for typos, but I did find one. I'm sure there's more, of course. I was almost skimming the book, so I'm sure I missed some, but yes. This isn't a bad thing, it's just a thing you notice, not a big con at all. If anything, it says that they are trying to get the book out fast and little time is taken for revising errors. Whether that should be points taken away or not is up to your opinion, really. But I won't. It was only a single error after all. If it's several all over the place, then yeah, that's quite the oversight. One, though, doesn't bother me. Then there's the writing style. It is very boring to read. There's no flavor to it, you know? I completely understand why there wouldn't be, because of course there's several different people writing these books. It'd be hard to keep an interesting writing style consistent. But still, whether it can be helped or not, it makes reading the book quite bland. They stick to this very formal kind of style, with no personality to it. So yeah, that's quite the downside as well. One last point I'd like to make in this section is that I noticed a sort of inconsistency. At some parts, we're learning about this world alongside Firepaw, and as you may or may not know, I am a big fan of this type of writing. But the issue is, sometimes we're just given information that Firepaw hasn't directly learned himself. It switches between learning with the protagonist and being told the information by the narrator. I don't really know why they did this, but I don't really like it, to be honest. It's not as fun to read, and the way it switches like that makes it feel inconsistent. This is an opinion, of course. I love the world building around the character, and the reader gaining the same knowledge the character does at the same time, as opposed to being given the basic information at the start and told to roll with it. It's so much more immersive. They did do this at the start of Into the Wild, which I praise them for. But as things moved on in the book, it went back and forth from learning with Firepaw to this new information being thrown at her like, hey, by the way, this detail exists, neat, huh? And actually, for the majority of the book, it was learning with Firepaw, but there were occasions where it switched, enough times to be noticeable. And that's all I have to say on the writing. On to the storyline. Now, first off, I want to say that the pacing of the story so far is pretty well laid out for Warrior standards. They're not trying to go too fast, and they leave room for simple character bonding time. It's simple, but it could go a long way, and it makes the book so much better. I say they're not trying to go too fast, but I will admit that things happen a little quickly. You know, if it weren't for the breaks in the main story spending time with the characters instead of forcing the plot, then you'd probably be able to tell how fast the plot is progressing very clearly. But because of these breaks, it makes it feel a lot more well-paced, and I think that's good. I also like how we're plunged straight into action in the prologue. It's an intense scene, they're fighting, and they're desperate. Then it switches to the much calmer scene with Blue Star and Spotted Leaf, and it brings that feeling that yes, these wildcats are surviving rough. The rest of the storyline throughout this book is basically just asking a question. Did Tiger Claw kill Redtail? And Firepaw dealing with that question. It gets kind of repetitive with how much he's like, I'm going to tell Blue Star, and then never does. I believe it's supposed to be like that to an extent, but it feels almost like filler to me. They need to make more pages with something, right? Other than that, that's really all I have to say on this section. There's not much to go on with just the first book, so I don't have much to say. So, on that note, I think I'll rank Into the Wild as Tier A. My reasoning being that while it has several flaws, as Warriors books do, it's still very good compared to the other books in this massive series. With the character bonding, the incredibly low amount of spelling errors than usual, the pacing, all that. I don't think it fits in the S tier, but A is a good fit. That's all for this video then. If you enjoyed what I had to say and agree with it, make sure to subscribe. I'll be making more of these in the future, and the next tier ranking video I'm doing will be Wings of Fire: The Lost Heir. Even if you didn't agree, I'd love to hear your arguments in the comments. I'll gladly respond and take into account what you've said. If you have any suggestions for more videos I could do, especially for my discussion series, feel free to comment them. I'd love to make your ideas a thing if I can. With that said, farewell, friends!